So that, to just add a practical afterthought to this, if possible at all, do not resent encountering difficulties or problems in your life, because that's how it works. And it doesn't stop even if you awaken. Even if you're awakened, there's still things that you get challenged further. Everybody gets challenged by life in one way or another. You can't, even the trust fund baby gets challenged by life eventually. So when you encounter difficulties, small or big, see if you don't say, this should not be happening. This is the underlying attitude. If that's your underlying attitude, you're in a state of resistance. For example, many difficulties come in the form of other humans. Humans are difficult. You might have noticed. Many. So they come in the form of other humans. And then the underlying mindset for many people is, this shouldn't be happening. These people shouldn't behave like that. What we're really saying is they should be enlightened. Why aren't they? Well, what about you? So difficulties come in the form of other humans, and then you see, this is meant to be. You're meant to be challenged by other humans, and you cannot not be challenged. No matter how conscious you are, you will encounter other humans who are not, or not yet. And they will try to create problems for you, and sometimes they achieve that. It is true also that you attract fewer unconscious humans into your life as you awaken more. The awakening, it is true that you're not going to move in circles where you're surrounded completely by completely unconscious humans, but you cannot totally avoid contact with unconscious humans. In fact, they need to come into your field of consciousness because they can be helped in many cases by being in your field of consciousness. But they can only be helped if you do not react when you encounter them. If you say, you do what you have to do, but you don't, the underlying mindset is not, this shouldn't be, they shouldn't do that, they should know better. Well, they don't. So then other difficulties come in other ways, because you can encounter, so we just really talked about relationship. If other humans means relationships. They can be the intimate relationships of people living together. They can be relationships of people working together. Other kinds of relationships. Then, this already makes up for a lot of problems that people face. It's relationship problems. Oh. And then you have others. If you don't have relationship problems, then life says, okay, I'll give him or her something else. Then you have a work problem at work, usually connected with relationship too, but maybe some additional factors. Or you have a health problem. So you have a problem where you live, you have a financial problem. That's a big one for many. Not enough. Or maybe there is enough, but your mind says it's not enough. Who knows? Shortage. The problem of losing your job, the problem of insecurity, which isn't a problem unless you think you should have security, that life is insecure, you don't know what's going to happen next to you. That can be a huge challenge. But once you accept that, actually insecurity can contribute, if you no longer fight it, if you don't demand that your life should be secure, it can contribute to the arising of presence. because it forces you more into the present moment. Insecurity means you go into the future and see you can't control it anymore. You don't know what's going to happen next. Oh dear, I wish I had a secure job, a secure income, a secure family environment. I wish I had a secure pension plan. I wish I had a secure life insurance. I wish I had secure this and secure that. Then I would be okay. Of course, you wouldn't. These things are, if you remove the element of risk or insecurity from a person's life, this is similar to the trust fund baby, then you remove one of the most important areas where you can grow by being challenged. So sometimes the emphasis in our societies in the West is too much on security these days. I mentioned somewhere before, I read last year, I was going by a school, secondary school, and it was the beginning of the summer vacation, and they have a big sign outside where there's always notices, they post notices, and then on that big sign at the school it said, "Have a great vacation, be safe." That sounds reasonable advice, because you don't want to be unsafe. But is that the main thing of your vacation? You come back after the summer, the teacher asks you and say, "I was really safe." What did you do? "I didn't leave my room because I wanted to be really safe." So life again needs to be a balance between security and risk-taking and accepting the basic insecurity of all life. When I wrote The Power of Now, I was already in my late 40s, and I didn't have a home anymore. That wasn't the original time when I didn't have a home, because after the original time I did have a home, but then I let go of it, and then I had a limited amount of money, as I briefly mentioned in the book, to finish the book. What would happen after that? In my late 40s, no life insurance, no job prospects, no income, no savings, except those that were running out, no home, no relationship even, nothing. So, and that insecurity contributed to the intensity of presence through which the book came. It could have led to fear, and it could have blocked me if I had demanded that my life should be more secure than it is. But I did not demand that security. I accepted the insecurity, and it became enormous presence. Because all security has to do with future orientation. So the more you have future orientation, the more insecure you feel, because you cannot control the outcome. So the fact that my money was running out, that I had no home of my own anymore, I was just going from place to place, contributed to the energy behind the writing and the book. So that's a wonderful thing. Some people cannot take that step. They feel that step into the unknown. The impulse that came to me was so strong at the time when I knew I had to leave England for the reason I didn't know, and I had to move to the west coast of North America. Didn't know why, but the impulse was so strong I had to obey it. Well, I didn't have to, but I did. But I'm sure if I had not obeyed that impulse, which didn't just come once, it was there every day, I would have probably fallen ill and maybe would be dead already by now. So the life demanded that I step out into the unknown. If that is the case with you, then you know what to do. Without being rash about it, you still need to look at the practicalities. So insecurity is one of the Great challenges, wonderful. And all these things, of course, life insurance, these are just illusions. How can you insure your life? First of all, life insurance isn't life insurance, it's death insurance, because that's what it is about. They just don't call it death insurance because nobody would want to buy it. So the universe, the one consciousness, whatever you want to call it, is awakening in every human. And every human's essential identity is that one consciousness. So it's not a personal thing, because if you think yourself only as a person, then you have the delusion that you're an autonomous entity cut off from everything and everybody else. But you're not an autonomous entity, you are just a cell in this vastness. And for a few years, the cell gives itself a name, or is given a name. So and so, that's me. Me. It really changes your life when the way you feel, you sense your own life to be. If you are the awakening consciousness in this body. It's wonderful. And those challenges of life, all the things that continuously seem to almost designed to make your life difficult. If you look at your life, yes, there are interludes of you can take a sigh of relief and you can say, I've made it, I have arrived. Something good has happened and here I am. But never for very long. Quite soon something else comes up to spoil that lovely place that you thought you had arrived at. Sometimes it's the case with relationships. Sometimes it's the case with your profession or what you achieve there, or your social status or whatever it may be, or possessions. So you feel, I made it, and then these interludes never last for too long, and then life brings you another big obstacle. Now deal with this. And that brings about suffering. If you don't know the deeper dimension of who you are, your reaction to the problems of life, the difficulties of life, the challenges of life, the manifold tribulations of life, then you suffer, become unhappy. Because you don't understand why you're here. You're not here to find your comfort zone, although when you do have comfort zones for a while, enjoy it while it lasts. It's fine. But you're not here to find your comfort zone. You're here to, I will go so far as to say, you're here to made to feel uncomfortable. To experience difficulties. And of course, You are experiencing difficulties both on a personal level and on a collective level. Some difficulties are of a collective kind, such as are increasing in the time period that we are living now. The external challenges are increasing. Sometimes externals seem to be, you live in a relatively stable external environment as far as the collective is concerned, economically, socially, or politically. You live in a relatively ordered and stable environment, and then most of the challenges that come to you are of a more of a personal nature, challenges that concern your health, that concern your finances, that concern your relationships and your living situation. And so then you have most of your challenges come on a personal level. You're then relatively you live in a relatively stable external environment, as in Western countries has been for quite some time now. There are other countries on the planet, while the West lived in relative stability collectively. Other countries, of course, have been in turmoil and still are in extreme turmoil, where the challenges that most people in those places face tend to be more of a collective kind than of a personal kind. When the economic situation is extremely bad, the political situation is extremely unstable, there's violence around that could threaten you at any moment. But now in the Western world, we are moving from a relatively stable collective environment to a more turbulent collective environment. And it's becoming more turbulent into various areas. And we only see the beginning of it. Now, this is not something to be afraid of. It is part of a normal cycle of development that is the same for an individual as it is for the collective. And there are cycles, both as an individual, you find most people find they move sometimes into a period of turbulence in their personal life, when they're not just facing one or two challenges, when many things seem to be happening at the same time, many seemingly negative things seem to be happening at the same time. You lose your job, then you lose your marriage, divorce, then you might not even keep your home. You suddenly and you fall ill. This is not all that unusual for a person to have to experience a sudden influx of challenges on a personal level. And if you don't experience that, if your life is so regular that you have a job that is not challenging, but you have almost 100% job security, and you go every day, you go to the same office, come back, always, perhaps you're not married or not having no relationships, you're not challenged there. A few people maybe like that until finally they fall ill or something. Eventually something happens to all of them. But if several decades you had a very ordered life, that would be the most undesirable thing, because there would be no evolution of awareness, of consciousness in you. You would remain stuck in your relative comfort zone, and without any awakening of consciousness, you would not evolve as a human being. You remain stagnant. It's only by being challenged that you evolve, and we have to look at why that is. But before we look at that, let's look for a moment at the collective again. Problems seem to be arising one after another in the collective, and we can't even foresee what the next problem is going to be. Suddenly something comes, oh, who could have foreseen what the 2020 would bring? Nobody foresaw it. Well, I haven't seen any psychics that foretold. Well, there might have been one. I don't think so. So the important thing is to realize that whether the challenge or the adversity, whatever you want to call it, whether it is of a mostly of a personal nature or whether it's also collective nature, well, that's also personal. Collective just means that a large number of people in any location experience the same kind of challenge. That is a collective challenge. You still, of course, it still affects you personally. So a large number of people experiencing the same kind of challenge at the same time, in the same location. So this is what's happening to many people now, and is going to continue to happen. Now, what is the relationship of this? The relationship between realizing your essential identity as the light of the world and the challenges that you're experiencing that are coming towards you right now, more of a collective kind, but also of personal kind. The same external circumstances are experienced very differently by one person who is still very unconscious, and another person who is much more conscious, which means more in touch with that which is beyond the conditioned personality. This person experiences the tribulations of this world, the difficulties, very differently from a person who is still deeply trapped in ego. The person who is still deeply trapped in egoic identity, that any challenge becomes very, very threatening. Not only that, even the possibility of challenges that might happen or going to happen, things that are going to go wrong, is already an enormous source of suffering for many people who are trapped in their egoic identity. They even at night, they're in bed at night, or doesn't have to be in bed at night, and then they're thinking, how much worse is it going to get? The world situation, for example. How much worse is it going to get? And then you can play out scenarios. And you're experiencing emotions that are the same emotions that you would have if these things were actually happening. Or worse, probably worse. Very often the scenarios that the unobserved mind creates, and again, it's lack of consciousness, lack of not enough light of consciousness in you, then all you have is the unobserved mind that is creating an enormous amount of suffering for you, of playing out scenarios that are not here, and not only that, also reacting to challenges that are here in a very limited way through the old conditioning of their minds. And this is a very important point for you to realize, for us to realize, that a vital thing as we move into this period of turmoil, external turmoil, the way in which you experience this is largely determined by your state of consciousness. If it's purely reactive, then it's going to be extremely difficult. Not only that, the reactive consciousness, I pointed it out before, is largely dominated by fear, and any action you take that is arising out of a fearful and very limited state of consciousness is ultimately not going to be helpful, and in most cases will make things worse. Any fear interferes with your ability to be aware, to be conscious, and even to think rationally. Even that becomes difficult when there's fear, because then your thinking is no longer your thinking, it's fear thinking. Thinking becomes controlled by fear. It's all part of the egoic consciousness. So our greatest challenge does not come from outside, no matter what happens. Our greatest challenge comes from the inside, from our conditioned minds. And that's an important realization. In any situation, be aware of, in any given moment, which ultimately means in the present moment, be aware of your state of consciousness here and now, and make that your primary reality. If fear rises, ask yourself, how does it arise? Why am I fearful? And then in most cases, you will realize that the fear is produced by your thinking, not by the situation. In fact, the situations you can always deal with. They happen in the present moment, and you face them in the present moment. But the fear is the realm where you're incapable of taking action while you're in a fearful state of consciousness. Or if you take action, it's completely contaminated by fear, complete lack of wisdom. So the greatest challenge is how do I face the external situation? What action do I take is always secondary. Action may sometimes be necessary. But prior to taking action, you need to be aware of your state of consciousness out of which the action arises. And if that state of consciousness is egoic, then the action is going to, in many cases, make matters even worse, amplify the problem. You know that when you meet a very unconscious person, just a simple example from your personal dimension, when you meet a very unconscious person who is very angry, whatever, and what they want to draw you into their anger, what is your state of consciousness? Is your state of consciousness be determined by this unconscious person, in which case you will react and amplify that person's unconsciousness, and you yourself becomes drawn into unconsciousness. That's unconscious action. The same person, if you're aware of your state of consciousness, faced with an angry person, you can stay present, and you immediately know, even without any thought, that this person is in the grip of unconscious mind patterns, emotional patterns, and you can be, instead of becoming reactive, you become more alert. And Thereby, this difficult person, instead of making you as unconscious as they are, can actually help you become more present in any difficult situation, whether it's a small difficulty or a bigger difficulty. You can go either way. You can go into reactivity, and when you go into reactivity, this reactivity is a force within you that has taken possession of you, and it can grow in you. And then you try to still solve the external situation through this cloud of negativity, of reactivity. And you will make it worse. You will amplify it. You will create more enemies, or whether in the form of human beings or antagonistic situations, so to speak, adverse circumstances. So how things evolve in the externals, this is connected to your state of consciousness. So it's vitally important for humans. You can try it out in your own life. If you're non-reactive, but present when you're faced with difficult situations or people, and this applies to anything, whether it's lack of money, many people experience now lack of income, relationship difficulty, turmoil in their environment. Make it your primary concern to be responsible for your state of consciousness first. Keith Baker asks, I have owned the audio version of The Power of Now for over 10 years, but I feel that I still get stuck around my pain body. There must be something very seductive about it, as I feel I spend a lot of time in negative thoughts like, what's the point? And you'll never get past this, so why even try? Which can lead to feelings of hopelessness and depression. I've read that emotions generate chemical compounds in the brain which can be addictive, like drugs, so that it's possible to be addicted to negative thinking in a sense, and I think I suffer from that addiction. Do you have any insights as to how to break free? And above the summary of the process for dealing with the pain body on page 33 of your book. Let me just visualize my book. It's not working. It is true that negative thinking can be very addictive. From my point of view, it is not caused by the chemical that's generated in the brain, although I do not deny that the chemicals in the body very often reflect certain things that happen on the mental, emotional level. But what comes first, the chicken or the egg? So if you become very angry, of course there are certain chemicals that are released in the body, and if you become peaceful, then they go. The addiction is not in the chemical, I don't deny that there is a chemical component to emotional states, but it is the addiction to negative thinking. And the addiction to negative thinking is usually connected to the pain body, which is the emotional field that feels fed, fueled by the negative thinking. So addiction means it feels, on some level, it feels good. If you're addicted to something, on some level, it feels good. If you're addicted to alcohol, the drinking feels good while you drink, not afterwards, but while you drink. So if you're addicted, to whom does it feel good? Not to you, not to the physical body, because the physical body suffers through it, but to the pain body. This emotion loves to get more of the same energy. by generating further negative thinking in your mind. And it feeds on it because it doesn't get enough food through the drama in your relationship. Either you don't have one, or there's not in, or your partner doesn't cooperate enough. So, how this, you are, Keith, you are aware of these negative thoughts that you mentioned that are repetitive and happen frequently. You give 2 examples. One is, you'll never get past this, so why even try? And what's the point? It's another one. And there are probably others. So you are aware of these thoughts, but it seems that you are not aware in the moment that these thoughts arise. You are aware retrospectively. After the thoughts, you realize, oh, there was that thought again. The question is whether there's enough presence in you to be aware in the moment or immediately after a thought of that kind arises, to notice it, to notice also its futility, to notice its repetitiveness, to notice its pointlessness, its untruths, to notice that you don't want it because you don't want it. When you notice it, you are the awareness, and you as the awareness don't want it. The pain body wants it. So the awareness has to come in so that you break the link between your pain body and your thought processes. That is the key, is to sever the link between your thought processes and the pain body. In order to sever the link between those, there needs to be enough awareness, presence. Only the presence can sever the link. The presence comes in, and so you no longer, the emotion is no longer controlling your thought activity. That's the key. And that's the beginning of the end of that vicious circle that otherwise will take over your life. So what is needed is for you to be there in the moments these thoughts occur, or immediately after, and then immediately look at the thought and say, there it's again, and do not believe it. You know, some of you, or many of you might know Byron Katie's work, and Byron Katie's work questions your thoughts. And that's a wonderful thing, so that you no longer believe every thought that comes into your head. What's the point? If you believe it, so what's the point? Oh, it's not working anyway. Nothing works in my life. It's never has anything worked in my life. I remember these emotions, these thoughts I used to have in my 20s and even in my teenage years for many years. One of my favorite thoughts was, bad things always to happen to me, of course, bound to happen to me, it's always to me, always bad things happen to me. And the strange thing is, they always did. There was my early awakening, an awakening, not the real awakening, an awakening episode I had, which actually to some extent already transformed my life in my teenage years when I was 17. And already in my 20s I was unhappier even, especially the second half, well, first half too, but but in my teenage years, I had such thoughts like, of course, bad things always happen to you, and there was a lot of anger and resentment about life. And the first awakening came when I was living in Spain with my dad, and a woman left some books with us. She was going back to her country, German books. And she said, "Can I leave these with you? I'll pick them up again next year when I come back." She never came back. And so we had these books. We didn't have many books. I started reading them, and there were books by a spiritual teacher, in a German, Swiss German or German spiritual teacher. And for the first time I read that your thoughts have something to do with what you create in your life. And that was almost, my mouth opened in astonishment. And at the time I was teaching myself to type on a typewriter. Of course there were no computers. So I had this old typewriter, and I used his texts. The most important parts I copied as part of my typing practice. How your thinking, you manifest through your thinking, you manifest outer reality, and how you can change outer reality through changing your thinking. Wow. And I practiced it, and it worked. My greatest desire was to leave home, and a year later, an opportunity opened up for me to go to England. And it would never have happened if I had not. I know it was the result of practicing changing my thoughts. So that was one wonderful opening. And then I was fine for a while, and then gradually I forgot about it, and for other reasons, more and more unhappiness accumulated again. But that was a temporary breakthrough, an amazing realization. So be there when the thoughts happen, recognize they're pointless, they're futile, they're painful, I don't want them, I don't need them, they have no purpose whatsoever. So Byron Katie approaches thoughts by asking, is it true? So whatever people say, is that true? And in most cases, say, well, do you know it to be true? There's no point. Is that true? Yeah, it's true. Do you really know it to be true? No, I don't know if there's no point or not. So it kind of diffuses the power of thought over you by asking the question. It's like taking the valve out of an inflatable toy by asking, do I really know? The thought is, yeah. And you pull out the stopper, and it goes, do I really know this to be true? No, not really. So, it doesn't mean you cannot seek a cure. You can take steps, but while it's there, to see it as a purification, because it has the potential of completely burning up your ego. So what to do, especially if you've already tried a lot of approaches. It's always easy to speak for somebody who is not experiencing physical pain. At the moment, I'm not experiencing physical pain. I have known pain, but not prolonged period of time, not physical pain over a prolonged period of time. But I know suffering. There is such a thing as conscious suffering. Obviously, you should continue to seek ways of alleviating the pain or finding a cure. But in the meantime, while it's there, I suggest that you explore the possibility of conscious suffering. That was practiced, for example, in Christianity, and it may still be practiced by certain people who are strongly identified with the Christian religion, but it was a very common thing in Middle Ages to when you had pain, to equate your pain with the suffering of Christ. Christ was the archetype of suffering. Whether you see Christ as a real person that lived, I believe he did, or whether Christ is a mythical concept, it can work in the same way. Christ is the archetype of suffering and of transcending suffering. In the same way that Buddha's teaching, he himself described, Buddha said, I teach suffering and the end of suffering. The literal words of the Buddha. I teach suffering means I show you how suffering arises. The end of suffering is the transcendence of suffering. Jesus didn't say that, but it's all contained in his life and the image of the crucifixion and the cross. Because the cross is the instrument of suffering. It's a torture instrument. And then you see the God nailed to the cross, or the man nailed to the cross. It is the archetype of human suffering. In that sense, one could say he represents every man and woman, because every man and woman goes through their suffering, whether it might not be extreme physical pain, but it is human suffering, some more extreme than others. And then he died, and then the resurrection happened, and then the cross, the torture instrument, the very thing that gave him the pain, symbolizes the divine. So it becomes a portal into the transcendent dimension. By completely surrendering, which is the image on the cross, is the image of total surrender. And that is, in some traditions, called conscious suffering, which is, you don't need to necessarily, if you're not a believing Christian, it would be hard for you to say that you are suffering with Christ. But there's a deep truth in here, and that is, and I have seen it in people that I have known, people who have had pain for years, it can, if used consciously, it can erode your ego completely. If you regard it as a fire that's burning you up, the false you, it burning up. And so conscious is to actually not to resist it psychologically. It doesn't mean you cannot seek a cure. You can take steps, but while it's there, to see it as a purification, because it has the potential of completely burning up your ego if used consciously. And that is for those people who you might as well practice that, because that's all that's possible for you at the moment. If you then see there's a healing method or a healer somewhere, why not go there? But in the meantime, you practice conscious suffering. So that is not only with physical pain, you can also do it with other situations that you may be in. Suffering arises, and you come to a complete acceptance. If you completely accept, in a way, we really, to be strict, we should differentiate between suffering and pain. Normally, the way I use the words are, suffering is the psychological pain that is generated through resistance. So if you suffer physical pain, it can be terrible, but you can have physical pain without suffering, meaning without any resistance, psychological resistance on top of it. That's the suffering. And that applies to not just physical pain, but any situation in life, anything that goes wrong. There's the suffering is the psychological layer that is created through non-acceptance. So that does not need to be there. That is a practice. So most humans on the planet don't have a spiritual teacher. They wouldn't even want. Haven't even heard of anything such a spiritual teacher. What's that? But they all have their suffering. So I say that everybody has their spiritual teacher, and for most humans, it's their suffering, because eventually the suffering has an evolutionary function that is both the suffering that seems to come to you out of nowhere and the suffering that is self-generated in your mind and through unconscious action in the world, which then draws to you further unconsciousness from others. Nations, for example, go to war. That's unconscious action, then drawing further suffering to themselves. So there are two kinds of suffering. One seems to come out of nowhere, and other suffering is obviously generated through unconscious mind activity, and it is that kind of suffering that creates all the atrocities on a collective level and the personal drama that people are engaged in on a daily basis that is ultimately completely unnecessary, but it is generated by unconscious mind activity and the egoic self, which is mind-made. So that's the suffering that... Now, if you look at the amount of suffering that humans encounter, you will see that the larger part of suffering that humans encounter is self-generated. Yes, there is suffering that happens through earthquakes, natural disasters, and illness. Illness is already on the borderline between self-generated and something that just comes to you. Many illnesses are self-generated through dysfunctional thinking and emotion. But if you look at the amount of suffering that's self-generated, it's far greater than the amount that seems to come to you from the outside. If you look at the history of the 20th century, especially the first half of the 20th century, how many people died through natural disasters or died prematurely through an illness compared to the people that were murdered by their fellow human beings? Far more were murdered by their fellow human beings in the 20th, especially the first half of the 20th century, than people who suffered through natural disasters or natural causes. Just amazing. It was hell for millions of people, 150 million, who knows the exact figure, who were murdered in the first half of the 20th century alone. Many of them, not even many, yes, between nations, but millions and millions of others murdered by their own governments in Russia, in Germany, in China, by insane governments murdering or, as in China, bringing about through absurd policies the starvation of millions. So if you have in any doubt about the dysfunction of the egoic mind, you just look at that history and see how much suffering humans generate for themselves. So that is something that we no longer do, and that's why we are here. We don't do that, and there's still a certain amount of suffering that will come to us. Now, there is a belief, especially New Age people, they will tell you whenever something happens to you, you fall ill, or you have an accident, or whatever happens, they may ask you, why did you manifest that? And that makes lots of people angry, understandably, because they say, I didn't manifest this accident, it just happened. There was a crazy driver, and he was coming towards me. There's nothing I could do. I didn't manifest it. Or I didn't manifest this terrible illness. I never wanted it. What are you saying? Therefore, I never say, did you manifest it, or you manifested it, or you should look into why you manifested it. Why not leave it alone? All I say is, whatever happens to you, once it's happening, accept it as if you had chosen it. That's the important thing. I'm not saying you chose it. You won't want to hear that. And it's not even literally true. There's some truth hiding there, but we don't need to go there. It's more important to choose whatever is happening, whatever is happening in this moment, or as if you had chosen it. And then the resistance goes. And every human suffers. Every life form suffers, because life is hard and challenging and precarious for every life form. From the moment life comes into being, life is challenging and precarious for humans, for animals, for plants. Every life form encounters obstacles in its attempt to grow and expand, and it continuously encounters obstacles to its expansion. Every human, in one form or another, if you come into this world, very quickly you'll find obstacles, seeming obstacles to your expansion and growth and well-being and flowering. I think you can all, if you think about your so-called life, how many obstacles life seems to have put in your path towards happiness. And some people perceive life as life continuously is sabotaging my attempts to find happiness. Why is that? And then they have these strange theories that God is against me, whatever the theory is. But it does seem like, and this is related to the Buddhist term dukkha, or suffering. Wherever you go, you will find life is sometimes helpful and then obstacles again. And this is perceived as, some people believe if you only practice positive thinking continuously, you will no longer encounter obstacles. But that unfortunately is not the case. Positive thinking is a great thing, can be extremely helpful and bring about certain shifts in you, but it does not free you from experiencing the obstacles that life will put in your path and the challenges that come. So those obstacles, whether they come in the form of loss or illness or relationship problems, many of them arise from their own mind, because your mind creates an enormous amount of problems that are quite unnecessary, but the mind doesn't know that. So the mind creates an enormous amount of conflict that is unnecessary in your life. That's one kind of obstacle, is your own mind. Then, and again, you need to experience the consequences of the obstacles that your own mind creates, the conflicts and the unnecessary problems that your own mind, because you're identified with the mind, creates. You need to experience the suffering that you create for yourself out of that unconsciousness. Unconsciousness means completely identifying with the mind, the egoic mind, which in many cases transforms challenges which could be solved easily into much bigger problems. So you have your mind-created obstacles that you ultimately create yourself because you're not conscious enough, and then you encounter suffering. This is one level of suffering. And you need to experience the suffering that comes through unconscious use of the mind in order to awaken. It's only through the suffering that eventually you go, can't take anymore. As it happened to me when I was in bed one night and said, I can't live with myself anymore. And then somehow I realized that this myself that I couldn't live with anymore was an illusion. An illusory entity, and very unhappy mind-created entity. But before I realized that, I had to go through this suffering for years and years. So the suffering worked. It fulfilled its purpose. And then you have another level of suffering or obstacles. Obstacles come to you seemingly from the outside, that suddenly you have an accident, an illness. That's a kind of outside. It's just, something seems to happen to you that you have not contributed to. Something happens to somebody close to you, dies as an accident. Many things can happen, but you seem, I haven't created that. Of course, in New Age, it's very normal to say when things go wrong in your life, the typical New Age person will say, how did you create that? You slipped on a banana skin and broke your leg. Why did you create that? How did you create that? It's an interesting question. I don't want to go into this, whether even those obstacles or challenges that come to you, not seemingly not from your own mind, but from the outside, did you still create that or not? Let's leave that aside. I don't want to convince anybody one way or another. I have a much more simple recipe here, which goes like this. Instead of telling people, you better look at your life and see why you created that or how you created that, I say, accept each moment as if you had created it. Accept each moment as if you had wanted it or wanted it to happen. I can't remember my own writings. It's always not good to go into memory. Don't quote, just present moment. So, but if you live, whatever happens, you accept this moment as if you had chosen. That's the one I wrote. Accept each moment as if you had chosen it. Now, that's a good recipe for working, because if it already is the case, you might as well accept whatever is as if you had chosen it, because it's already here. So I'm not telling people you chose it. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Doesn't matter. Still accept it as if you had chosen it. That shifts things, that your whole attitude to it shifts, and it dissolves more quickly than whatever the obstacle is. But let's go back to the suffering. First, the suffering that arises from your own mind creates conflict and all those things that create suffering, and then at some point you awaken. And then what remains is the suffering that comes with having a body, for example, because eventually the body gets older. No matter how much you go to the gym every day, no matter how fantastic your nutrition is, no matter how many pills for longer life you take, which is all fine and good, but of course every form eventually dissolves, and a time comes when the body can be perceived as a burden almost. The older you get, the more likely it is to happen. And so Of course, you might then say old age isn't so bad if you consider the alternative, which is you die younger and then you don't have to experience the body getting fragile and old. But if you get old, the body can become problematic, a source of suffering, potentially. But those challenges, if approached correctly, don't have to turn into suffering. Accept each moment as if you had chosen it. If you can go with the isness of things, there's no complaining entity that says something about being a victim and complaining how dreadful things are now. I wish my mother had learned that lesson when she suffered in that way, because she had always identified very much with her body, good looking, always nicely dressed, going out, and liked to be looked at, very normal thing for many people. And then the body got older and older, and then hip problems and other fractures and this, and got worse and worse, and the unhappiness grew and grew. Not so much of limited movement, but the identity. So much was in the body that those tremendous suffering. I tried to free her, and occasionally there were moments when she could disidentify from body, but very, very brief. And that is the destiny of many humans. But the suffering is really that every life form encounters, the obstacles that every life form encounters, whether they come at a younger age, older age, middle age, in whatever form, these things are absolutely necessary, without which there would be no human evolution whatsoever, and no life form would ever evolve if the life form did not encounter obstacles. So that which looks like an obstacle is actually always potentially an opening. Potentially that seems to stop your progress in life, always potentially can make you more conscious. So you can use every obstacle that arises in your life, if you can works especially quickly, if you accept each moment as if you had chosen it, and when it looks this moment is an obstacle, you go with it instead of complaining or running away from it, and then accept, and then act if action is possible, or don't act if no action is possible.
Thank you all for this opportunity. My question is, nearly all spiritual and religious traditions refer to some sort of life after death. The idea of living on after dying seems to me like an idea that egoic structures would come up with in order to support or enhance the ego. Some sort of life after death might still be true, but it seems to me that the idea could instead possibly be one big narrative lie created and propagated across human civilization by the ego. Our embodied consciousness can be realized while we are alive, but upon death might actually become completely non-existent. Can you please speak to this?
Right, a very profound question. The ultimate answers. Reincarnation, of course, there are many traditions that speak of reincarnation, and it's always good to just, whenever you are asked a question, speak from your own experience or realization. And this is what I am also going to do mostly. The first thing to discover experientially is, as I've said before, it sounds a little strange, is that you are essentially invisible. You, not only what I can see of you is the body, and sometimes I may be able to see certain things in your mental emotional field. I can hear words that you speak, or your facial expressions. I'm talking to everybody, not just to Tina, but I can see facial expressions that kind of give me a hint of what you're feeling or thinking. But anybody who was looking for you in the realm of physicality would not find you. And if that's too much, let's just go for a moment let's talk about this. Perhaps makes sense to anybody who has a dog or a cat at home. When your dog or cat dies, which can be a very sad thing for people, and we come to humans later, it might be a little bit easier to start with the dog or cat. You may realize in that moment when suddenly the dog is dead or the cat is dead, but everything is still there, the fur, the body. There may even be some warmth left in the body, and there it is. But that which you essentially loved and related to in the dog or the cat isn't there anymore. So you can still, the touch is still the same, but something essentially is gone, and that was always invisible. What you love in the dog is ultimately, or the dog, you might love the way the dog looks and what it does, but when you relate to a dog, you essentially love, although nobody might have actually expressed it like that consciously, you love the consciousness of the dog. That's what you love in the dog. And when you look into the eyes of the dog, what's looking back at you is there's a consciousness of the dog looking back at you. And when that's gone, the dog is. And same with the human. What you love in the human is the consciousness of the other human. Now, you yourself, all that is invisible, because consciousness is the greatest mystery in the universe that science still has no idea what to do with it, cannot explain consciousness, and in most cases avoids talking about consciousness. The greatest mystery is the fact that the universe is conscious and that you are conscious. A surgeon looking for you by cutting open your skull and analyzing your brain will not find even a trace of you. Will not even find any of your countless hundreds of thousands or million memories that you have somewhere. In what form does a memory survive in you? Is the memory of your first teacher at school? I just mentioned the word, and suddenly an image of the first teacher you had at school comes to you. The memory of your grandmother who passed away, the memory of the bed that you slept in when you were 8 or 10 years old. I just need to mention it. It was somewhere, but where did that live in you? Was that in a molecule or an atom? The one atom was your bed? Or what is it? Nobody knows, and nobody can find even the memories that you make up the person that you are. even on that level, let alone the deeper level of the unconditioned consciousness, nobody can find you there. You don't exist in the realm of the visible, and not just the deepest essence, even as a person, even the person that you are, which is a mental, emotional construct or entity, even mind and emotion, you cannot find a thought as a material form. So this is why the downloading, as some science fiction predictions, downloading your mind into a computer, I don't think that's going to happen. It's an interesting idea, but it's not going to happen. You don't even know what a thought is. Nobody knows, and it doesn't exist in the realm of the visible. So you are essentially invisible. Now that you can sense that you are essentially invisible, the moment there's a cessation in the stream of thinking, and all that remains is, even though the thought is already invisible, but if you go a little deeper, there's the consciousness. And you cannot see it, taste it, touch it. Now, the important question that arises, is this consciousness a product of the physical brain? Is it produced by the physical brain? Is it possible that the physicality of the brain, which is on one level chemistry, on a deeper level atoms and molecules, so on the chemical level, the chemical soup that makes up the brain, can the physicality produce something non-physical that is consciousness? Or is the entire consciousness an illusion, as some scientists say? It's an illusion that the chemical soup is having. Who knows that? Who is the one that knows that the chemical soup is having an illusion? It's getting very complex now. Is consciousness an epiphenomenon? That's a fancy word for byproduct. Is consciousness an epiphenomenon of the brain, the physical brain? Or undoubtedly there's a connection between the physical brain, physicality, and consciousness, because you can knock somebody out, or somebody could give me a substance that makes me unconscious, or I could fall suddenly on my head and stop talking. Is that proof that consciousness is produced by the brain? Would it be proof if I smash the TV, that whatever you have been watching, or let's say the radio, I don't know if people still have radios, if I smashed the radio, which had been playing the Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and suddenly Beethoven's Ninth Symphony disappears. And then they say, this is proof that the radio produces the music.